Hey, it's Craig Fisher, and this is the Inside Talent Show. And it is brought to you by Visage.jobs, where you can crowdsource sourcing. It's fantastic. Today I'm here with Jason Roberts. Jason, how's it going? Tell us about you.
It is going well. Hey, Greg. Um, my name is Jason Roberts. I work at Accenture, and my job is to be responsible for our talent acquisition offerings at Accenture. What that means is people come to us, and specifically, I'm in Accenture's operations group, and people will come to us and ask us to take responsibility for portions of their process, and I help make that happen. And that means I get to work with all the technologies and tools and processes across a bunch of different customers and a bunch of different industries, and it helps me see lots of things.
Yes, and it helps us have some very interesting conversations, I would say,
It it does. It does it
because I
does.
do a lot of similar stuff. So, we're going to talk today about COVID's impact on the talent market. We're going to talk a little bit about what we're seeing with various companies, and what impact that's had on who's winning and who's losing because of all this.
That's right.
Yeah, and so let me ask you, start by saying this. eh, are there any really big trends that you're seeing happening in corporations because of where we are today with remote work and with testing and with everything that we have to jump across in order to get work done right now?
Yeah. Well, it's of course, the most significant shift is there is a lot less hiring, right? So, um, we went from I think our low unemployment rate was 3.5%. We were at 3.5% unemployment in February, and right now we're at 10.2%. So that's end of July numbers. August numbers at the time that we're talking haven't come out yet. Um, and so we're sitting at 10.2% today. Recruiting in a 3% unemployment rate market is a very different thing than recruiting in a 10% unemployment market rate. So in one situation, you're actively sort of, you're working a lot with passive candidates. You're trying to find people that aren't necessarily looking to change jobs, and there aren't a ton of people on the market. Um, some people believe that 5% is actually the healthy rate, where there's healthy churn. You're able to more simply find roles, and anything under that, you know, there was speculation at one point that we were sort of in a bit of a log jam when it came to candidates. But at 10.2, there's really great candidates everywhere. So if you spend a bunch of your time on passive candidates and you're not focused on the active ones, you're probably wasting your time. Like there's a lot of people out there that are really good at what they do that don't have jobs right now. So it's just a different thing altogether.
Yeah, so there are a bunch of A players scattered across the country right now that are not working. There's a lot of B players as well that are still really good, and your team needs all of that. Your team
Right.
even needs some C players, right? So now's a great time
Yeah.
to find them.
Good mix.
Yeah, right. And but there are a few types of candidates. So there's the ones that you may have already furloughed or laid off,
Hmm.
right? And I think that if you're a good company, you should be looking at those folks first.
Right.
Some companies don't want those folks back for whatever reason, and so then you're looking at new people that have to be introduced to your organization, basically.
Yep.
And so your branding kind of has to change. I feel like at this point, your job descriptions need to change. What you're offering candidates in terms of flexibility, work from home, all these things that are going to be a requirement, health and safety, insurance. I mean, all of these things are going to be really, really important to candidates that maybe they're A players and they've got a nice little runway to leave their last job. Or they, if they're any good, have probably started some consulting work and they don't have to jump into a new job right away.
Right.
So how do you attract those folks? And what have you seen?
Well, I think the work from home piece is key, right? So people, I think people won't want to go back to work.
Sure.
One of the questions that we're doing this survey of HR leaders focused on COVID response, and one of the questions that was mentioned yesterday when I sort of crowdsourced some input on this was what percentage of your positions are you going to keep remote after this? And I think there's a bunch. I think
Mhm.
the that brings us to the first big. We were talking about winners and losers in this thing. I think the long-term loser is on this side is going to be sort of corporate real estate. If you own commercial real estate that you're in a big downtown metro area, man, you're in trouble. There's
Right.
going to be it's going to be difficult to get anyone to renew a lease, and I think what's going to happen is spaces are going to be broken up into much smaller spaces with flex work offered. Sort of the WeWork model just exploded
Right.
across the market, so that people can have a place to come and meet, but not necessarily a place where they come and work every single day.
Right. Yeah, I think you're right. Now this is interesting. One of my neighbors is the building manager for the Bank of America Tower
Hmm,
in downtown Dallas, right? And he
right.
says they're still okay. There's still people coming and going into offices, and it's maybe half of what it normally is.
Yeah.
Um, and they will find other uses for some of that space, right? So we know that a lot of the call centers, for instance, that were being used by the hospitality industry that are now kind of vacant have been shared with local and state municipalities where those organizations have to distribute healthcare and phone and be
Yep.
manning phones for questions from people inquiring about tax benefits and COVID benefits.
Well, that and like unemployment
Yeah,
is another one where they've really um, they've had a real trouble. Um, we so at Accenture we get asked to participate and even staff. So you've got the idea of the contact tracers and the people who are sort of tracking infection and then the connections between infected people.
right.
So they're setting up, each state is setting up massive call center sort of environments, but there's a combination of roles between investigators and contact tracers,
Mhm.
people that are just calling and saying, hey, you were in contact with someone in the last 30 days or the last uh, 72 hours even that has tested positive for COVID. You need to self quarantine for 2 weeks. And there are people who are being gathered in these centers. There are investigators to go identify who all those people are, and then there are people making calls telling them that they've been in contact with someone who's been infected. And this is happening across many states. So Accenture's doing this for some, others are doing it for others, but um, those call centers are being picked up there too. So yeah,
Mhm.
there's new work to be done
Right.
that wasn't there before. I think the hospitality industry is gonna and they're gonna have a tough road to recovery. They're actually sitting if the population as a whole um, is at 10.2% unemployment. Leisure and hospitality, that segment in the Bureau of Labor and Statistics, is at 25% unemployment.
Yeah.
And I thought that was low. I thought it would be closer to 50.
Well, it's interesting. When at Allegis, I worked with CVS quite a bit,
Hmm.
and we did some work on revamping their job ads and things like that when all of this came down because they announced they had to hire 50,000 people
Yeah,
to be frontline healthcare professionals and
yeah,
man call centers and warehouses. And so what they did was they had agreements with some of their customers like Hilton where they would take on some of those furloughed workers for those jobs. And then, when Hilton opens back up, those people might be able to go back to Hilton. They've got this agreement, or they might find a permanent home at CVS. So that's one of the reasons that that number is a little bit lower because there are a lot of collaborations like that going on right now.
so let's talk furloughed workers for a minute. One of the things that was pretty shocking to me is we had customers come to us and say, "Hey, we just furloughed a bunch of people. It's time to bring them back, right?" And these are these some of these were sort of distribution centery, warehousey people. Some were retail, um, and they're all sort of the, let's call it 12 to $18 an hour workers, right? Low skill, high volume sort of jobs, and they were all sent home for a little while. And then when it was time to bring them back, the challenge was that when they sent them home, they didn't get a reset on their contact information. And with that population, they change phones way more often. They may not even do email. It's just it's much more difficult to keep track of them. Change addresses more often as renters. So we deployed sourcers to help with that, and we had sourcers go out and find furloughed people for a minute. It was great. Lost you there. There you are. Hey, Craig, I can't hear you.
There we go.
There you go.
So let me ask you about that. Oh, I lost you. There you
No,
go.
I'm back. There we go.
All right. So you deployed sourcers to help locate furloughed people
Yes.
and get them back into a queue for certain types of jobs
Yeah.
with their original companies or with other companies.
With their original companies.
Mhm.
So the original company. So they did a massive callback, and then some of the people they called back they couldn't actually
Yeah.
make contact with, and some parts were easy. Like it was just networking. Hey, you work on this shift with this person. Do you know how to get in touch with them?
Hmm.
Some people it was harder, and we actually brought in some of the really interesting sourcing techniques you learn at SourceCon. I'm wearing my SourceCon shirt today.
Yeah. Okay.
So, but yeah, so the open source intelligence stuff that you can do, looking at communications and how people interact with each other. We pulled some of that stuff out to help identify where these people are now.
Hmm.
We There was at least one case where we direct messaged a person on Twitter that we couldn't find any other way,
Did it work?
and it worked
That's
like
great.
a champ.
I
Yeah,
love that.
yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know if they're like me, I wouldn't see that for about 2 weeks because I don't check my direct messages on Twitter hardly at all.
What's the worst for me is LinkedIn. As a recruiting guy, you think I'd be on there all the time, but
Right.
I'll go and just look at LinkedIn every once in a while, and I've got a stack of messages, and these are people that are accustomed to everyone being in there all the time,
Right.
so they're super annoyed at me, like they think I'm the worst person.
Right. Well, yeah, and if you're smart and you know how to wrangle people, and a good recruiter will figure out the best way to communicate with whoever. Right.
Yeah,
So I figured out the ways I need to communicate with you, and vice versa.
yeah,
And I'm the same. Even though I'm on LinkedIn a lot, and it's kind of one of my primary mediums. Um, I'm heads down right now. I mean, I'm so busy, and
yeah,
doing a lot of this, obviously, but also doing workshops and consulting work for big companies and helping out tech startups with advisory and the stuff that you do when you're not working in a full-time job, and it's really busy, right? And so I focus a lot. I go and I do sprints like Glenn Cathy was talking about yesterday,
mm,
and I don't do anything else. My phone is turned off or turned down so that I can't see it. I don't get interrupt driven, and I go for a couple hours at a time, completing a task or whatever that given time is. So I
you
may or
know,
may not see it.
Glenn used to break his day down into 5-minute increments.
Yeah.
That's I can't do that now. What I'll say is I find that my email piles up on me because I don't. There was a time when I would look at email while I'm on conference calls.
Hmm.
I don't know if it's the type of role I have now or something different, but I feel like I have to be completely 100% present on a call now. I
Hmm.
can't do emails and be effective on there any longer.
Well, and we didn't used to have to be on video for all of our conference calls. right?
That's true.
I mean,
That's true.
you're giving a lot of nonverbal cues now if you're looking away
Yeah.
and distracted the whole time.
Well,
And
it's funny.
you have to be an active listener as well.
Yeah. Well, so I have a second screen over here, and it's where all of my information is and things like that. The screen that has my camera attached is actually kind of small.
Mhm.
So I like to look over here a lot, but it looks like I'm not paying attention. So I end up completely zeroed in. It's good.
Yeah, and I do the same thing. I have to actually maneuver whoever I'm looking at directly behind my camera.
Mm,
But my camera, it's on a bendy clip, so I can put it wherever I want.
got it.
But let's get back to something that you mentioned a minute ago. You said that you put sourcers on finding furloughed workers, which I think is brilliant. How many sourcers did you use, and did you have to engage any outside people?
We didn't. Accenture had the same challenge that many other companies have, right? Uh, well, we actually didn't as much as I thought we would. I thought we would have a slowdown. We would have to reduce our teams. We ended up not doing that. But we did sort of put a hold on hiring while we waited and saw sort of what was happening and figured out, how many how many people we needed and where they were going to be and all of that sort of thing.
Right.
And man, we came out of this thing, way better than I thought we would,
Hmm.
honestly.
Yeah.
Um, but our recruiters weren't very busy, and I had people that I could redeploy. So I honestly could have had as many as I wanted.
Hmm.
I only did a handful on this project. It wasn't a big group, but I didn't hire anyone else from the outside.
Right.
I did, however, engage some that weren't very busy internally.
Hmm.
Now, Tangi Pettis, I was talking to Tangi the other day. Um, she was furloughed, was brought back to her role.
Hmm.
Talk about an A player that got furloughed,
Oh
right?
yeah.
She's a beast. I really like her a bunch. And so she was furloughed, brought back into her role, and she and I had been working together um, in as she was taking on more management responsibility. She had asked me to help her sort of with some coaching on how to position things for executives and that sort of discussion. And so we stayed in contact for a while doing that. She had to furlough her team along the way,
Wow.
and she was able to bring back a pretty good number of them.
Hmm.
So I am starting to see recruiters return based on that, and that was a really happy story, right? So she called me. She said, "Hey, okay, I'm making my business case. Here it is," and we worked through the numbers and made the business case. And then she called me later and said, "They did it. They signed off. They
That's
God,
great.
that's the thing."
I love
So
it.
that was pretty exciting. Yeah.
Well, so we're recording this the day after Global Talent Acquisition Day, right?
Yes.
Which you were a
Yep.
part of. Thank you.
I was.
And I was a speaker, but I also produced the event. So I was there from 3 a.m. to 6 p.m.
That's
Because we
true.
spanned all time zones for Global Talent Acquisition Day, and the numbers are fascinating. We had 41 people from South Africa on, and it was
Nice.
just amazing, right? And I had to source a lot of the emails for the speakers because even though Batman put out this great invitation to speak in the Google Doc, he's a Google Sheets guy. He
Yep.
doesn't like Excel. So in the sheet that he created for us to contact the speakers who we actually put on the schedule, a lot of them were missing information because they probably, I don't know, got bounced and he was communicating with them through Facebook or whatever.
Yeah.
And so I had to go source a lot of stuff, and I use all the tools, right, all my tricks. But the last time I had to do that, I was sourcing um, for TalentNet, and I was trying to source talent acquisition leaders to invite them to attend. And I
Hmm.
actually used Visage.jobs for that.
Huh.
And so I outsourced my sourcing, which is great. So
That's cool.
I
Yeah.
put the type of role and the type of qualifications I want, and 8 hours later, I had an inbox full of spreadsheets and and candidates for that, which is kind of a fun way to do it.
Yeah, I wouldn't have thought to use them for that. We're looking at using them. We had a couple of really interesting use cases we were attempting with Visage. I really like what they do and the product there. I like Joss a lot. I think he's a smart guy.
Hmm.
He's got an interesting vision. Um, so we were looking at two different things. One, they have a platform, and we have, of course, a big offshore recruiting team. So they have a platform that basically is a communications platform between recruiters and sourcers.
Right.
And so we were looking at using the platform so that our offshore sourcers could just have a better mechanism to interact with recruiters. Secondarily, we were looking at them for places where we don't have a lot of volume of work, and that they can uh, bring in people to do work where there are different languages and things that it just doesn't make sense. I mean, I think all of us that have been in RPO at some point
Hmm.
get these RFPs, and you'll have countries with like two hires here and one hire there, and the question is always, can you fully cover all of these geographies? The answer is
Right.
always, sure we can. But I'm
Right.
not going
But
to,
yeah,
for your one hire, I'm not going to drop a guy in that country. I'm going to do something else.
I was part of standing up a PO box office in Budapest at one point, so I get it.
Yeah. So luckily we have an office there, but
Right.
it's
Well, we do too now, or
yeah, there you go.
Allegiance does.
So yeah, but that's the trick, right? So you've got to come up with interesting solutions, and we were looking at how Visage could do that because they've got this sort of network of sourcers to tap into.
Well, and they can, right? Which is cool about it. I mean, they've got 4,000 sourcers all over the world who kind of bid on chipping in to source for any requirements that come through from managers or recruiters. It is kind of a fascinating deal.
Yeah, smart.
Again. So let's talk about Global TA Day for a minute. What did you
Yeah.
think about that? And I mean, we ended up with 2,400 people signing up, and I think up to 1,100 at one time on the platform, which is
Wow, that's
crazy.
amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's a new record. I haven't seen that many on there. I think before this, the most I had seen is the Recruiting Automation Conference had. I think they peaked at 700, maybe 7 or 8.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, that's extraordinary. I think you may now have a record
Right.
for for these virtual conferences. I loved it. I thought it was excellent. Last year we had the Global TA Day thing, and it was sort of like a pass the hashtag game,
Yeah.
but there wasn't a lot of juice behind it. This
Right.
felt very, very interesting. Like it was, I jumped on early in the morning. I spoke at 9,
Mm-hmm.
so I joined about an hour earlier, and I was listening in. The first person I listened to speaking was from India.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Those
and
guys were
then
good.
yeah, they were great.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So I was fascinated by it, very prepared,
Mm-hmm.
good points to make. It was excellent. Um, I don't know the full name, but people were calling her Sue. So
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh yeah,
um,
she's good.
yeah, she was
I
great.
was I was talking about the other two guys, but yeah,
I didn't see those other two guys. I saw
yeah,
Sue.
Sue's good.
And then I didn't get to see Vanessa Rath, who I really like out of South Africa.
She was great.
So I thought she would have been. No, it felt like an actual global TA day,
Yeah.
and because it's a virtual conference, it's a way of actually having a global conference. It may have been the best global conference I've ever seen,
Yeah.
because it's, at least in our space,
Mhm.
because we really could have people from all over the world come and present, do their thing. Felt like we got to hear from lots of different places. What I really want to do is tap into some of the recordings from these things, because I'd like to see some of the Asia Pacific guys that were probably before me.
Mhm.
I'm imagining Asia Pacific and Europe primarily when the thing first started, and I joined about 6 hours in.
Yeah.
So there was a great deal of content before I ever got there.
Yeah, and it was really good. So I was manning the main stage the whole time, but I dropped in on everyone's sessions,
Yeah,
make sure how it's just like a live event, right? I'd go
right.
walk into other people's rooms and check it out. And so because Hopin is such a really wildly flexible platform, you can be in three places at once. So I would just open up another window and I could
Yeah,
have all the sessions going on multiple screens, which is really cool. So I could kind of see everything. And
yeah,
I'll tell you, the content was fantastic. So,
yeah,
for those who don't know, Global TA Day was presented by ATAP, Association of Talent Acquisition Professionals. And every ATAP member will get access to all the recordings and all the decks. So, if you haven't joined ATAP yet, it's well worth your time. A little bit
no,
of money.
that's I think that might be worth the annual fee just to get the
Absolutely.
access to the recordings.
Yeah.
So I'm just, now I'm considering joining ATAP, and I wasn't before. So
Yeah.
that's good.
Well, so Jim and I will be presenting the data at some point on a session, just like we're doing here, probably, that
Yeah,
we gathered, the reporting that we gathered from it. It is really, really interesting stuff. So I'm looking forward to that.
yeah. I'm glad it was such a success. It felt each time I go to these events, it feels like you're actually at a conference.
Yeah.
Um, the one thing I didn't do in this one was the networking button.
Yeah.
So I didn't do that this time. I think it was so packed with content that there wasn't like a set aside, okay, now everybody go network now.
Right.
So, and I didn't stop to go and do that. So that's
There
my one
were,
thing.
yeah, there were a couple built in, but you just probably weren't there at that time.
Yeah.
I think we should do a little more of that next time, but we were trying to pack so much stuff into the day. Um,
There was huge, well, you know, huge value for me, good bang for the buck. It cost me zero.
right.
And, but it felt good. I got to see people and interact with people in the chat. And it was a fun chat during my session. So it was great.
Right. Yeah. I was really lucky. I got to, well, so my first presentation was at 7 a.m. my time, and I'd already been up and staring at bright lights and screens for 4 hours at
Yeah.
that point. So I was all, and and I'd gotten up at 2:30 a.m. So I was already a little fuzzy at that point, but I think it went well. And then later in the day, I got to moderate a panel with Jerome Tiernick from CEO of Smart Recruiters
Yep.
and Glenn Cathy,
Yeah.
on the same stage. And that's a wild juxtaposition because Glenn comes with such a different approach and focus from anyone else. And
Yeah.
of course, Jerome is very practical and very, forward thinking. And so it was really, really fun. And we had, big numbers watching that, of which, of course, you'd expect.
Now, what's interesting is, so I missed that one. My day job got in the way a little bit.
That happened.
Uh, it does happen.
Yeah.
I missed that one, but I'm curious. I haven't seen Glenn on a panel, but I know Glenn well,
Hmm.
and he. Most people don't know this about him, but he's an introvert.
Oh, yeah.
And he's in a crowd. He's relatively quiet.
Hmm.
Even a crowd of people who he knows and who are his peers. If we're at a big conference where he's spoken, even seeing him out, even with the other people that he works with
It's
all the time.
rare. Yeah.
Yeah, he doesn't do that. And he doesn't interact as much on a panel. Did you have to pull things out of him, or was he as dynamic as he normally is when he speaks on his own?
So it's interesting. So knowing him as well as I do, and having been at many conferences with him before, I always play the part of taking him and getting him involved in stuff and putting him in a position where he is comfortable and can kind of get on a soapbox if he wants to, or just sit in a corner and drink a beer. So,
Yeah,
he's great. Years ago when we were speaking at a True London together, he and I and Marin Hogan and Bill Borman and several other folks got to go to a Portsmouth FC soccer match together.
wow.
Sit in the CEO's box, go down on the field with the kids and the players at the beginning, uh, dine with the players' wives, and like all kinds of
Oh
other
my
really
word.
cool. I know it was awesome.
Oh my. Yeah, that's it's a better story than my stories. I don't get to do those things usually.
Well, so in the panel, Glenn was great because I knew to direct things at him that he and I have talked about before. So, and I also, kind of went back and forth and directed things to Jerome, and I'd say, Jerome, what do you think about that? And give Glenn a chance to formulate his next thing. And I do a lot of that, and so it worked out just great. And he thanked me for it later, and he did a really good job. It was fun. Now, and he was also actually good at, um, chatting and responding to people in the chat while we were doing the presentation. So he was looking down a little bit, but he was very engaging, and he's got a really interesting perspective all the time.
Oh, always, always.
Yeah.
Actually, I should give him a call. We haven't talked in about 6 months, so
You should give him a call. Tell him I said
I should
hello
give him
again.
a call.
Yeah.
Let's do that.
All right. So, Jason, any final thoughts on winners and losers from the COVID impact on talent acquisition?
So, I mean, there's a couple. The big shift that I saw and that I'm living right now is the big winners seem to be uh, our lowest tier of worker, actually, in the U.S., where you have your grocery store workers, the people at Walmart, Target, those sorts of things. Those jobs have solidified at $15 plus an hour,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yep.
Now, pre-COVID and last year, we were still, you know, I guess minimum wage is 9 something an hour here in Texas. Um, and some of those jobs are starting to creep into the 11 or $12 an hour range. Um, Target here, where I am, is at $15 to
Mm-hmm.
start. Whether you've ever had a job or not, you're at $15.
Right.
Walmart's doing the same thing. So that tier, the pay has gone up for
Mm-hmm.
people that are willing to do those jobs. The follow-on impact has been that sort of the next level, better jobs in quotes were have always been sort of those warehouse worker jobs, right?
Right.
So they also require zero skill, um, and not a lot of prerequisites, but they always paid several dollars more per hour than your low tier retail stuff, right? So those jobs, they were at the 13, 14, $15 an hour range.
Yeah.
Much better than your 9 something, but still not great. Well, now there's a war for talent in that space,
That's right.
and it's so significant that you've got Amazon putting up billboards with digital hourly rates that are changing by the day.
Mm-hmm.
So if you drive into work and you see that they're paying $17 an hour, by the time you drive home, they may have upped that to 18.50 an hour, and all of their competitors are scrambling and having to sort of keep up with that along the way. And I think it's an interesting market position. You're seeing people just really wrestling to figure this out, and I think there's a couple of reasons for that. One is the additional federal boost to unemployment was very helpful, because at some point these workers, it made way more sense for them not to go back to work,
That's right.
right? They were way better off, so wages had to increase to make it a better deal for them to go to work, to entice them to do that, which I think in the long run is probably going to be healthy for that segment anyway. um, and then you've got some people who have legitimate limitations that have been pulled out of the workforce because their kids aren't going to school in person, or they have true health concerns where they need to stay home because they're in a high risk category with diabetes or something.
Right.
So there are these sorts of categories that are pulling people out. Bottom line is, it feels like recruiting software engineers in Silicon Valley in the early 90s,
Yeah.
like or oh no, late 90s, early 2000s,
Right.
where remember you would see planes flying around, um, somebody's headquarters with banners asking them to call the other guy
Oh
to
yeah.
apply for jobs.
Yeah.
You'd have food trucks parked in the parking lot. Give us your resume, we'll give you lunch. It's that level of shenanigans going on in order
Right.
to entice workers right now.
It's Saul Goodman putting pamphlets on car windows.
I'm telling you, man, it is wild. And these are recruits that are not the normal recruits that a lot of the sourcers and recruiters we work with go for. They're not the your typical white collar folks. They don't have a resume on LinkedIn.
Right.
They don't have a profile. You've got to get creative with these things. So that's the biggest segment where I'm seeing a bunch of work. It's that lowest tier of our workforce
Right.
is where there seems to be the most demand right now.
So recently, Allison Cruz went to work for Baxter in
Okay.
an employer brand role. And prior to that, I had done a project for Baxter with Allegis, where they needed to hire a bunch of warehouse workers, their clean rooms and things like that, in rural North Carolina, and same type of thing. And we had to get real creative on how to actually make that happen. How do you contact these people? And we went to so text campaigns were great, right?
Yep.
Text campaigns were really good for that. But we also went to gas pump ads, which
Oh, that's a
worked
good
really
idea.
well, and advertising on Christian radio stations worked really
Hmm.
good, and a series of billboards and bus stop ads worked really good. So, I mean,
Nice.
yeah, it successful project, but for you recruiters out there listening, if you're stuck trying to recruit these folks that don't have a resume on LinkedIn and they're not white collar, there are ways to do it, but it might be a more traditional approach than the digital stuff you're used to. But text campaigns, clearly, that's a good call.
Yeah, I think that segment of our population is the big winner in this whole thing. Like my
Yeah.
my daughter, she worked on she worked at her campus start Barnes and Noble at Texas A&M, and she was furloughed. Right after spring break, she's furloughed,
Hmm.
and she stayed on furlough through the summer, but she also qualified for that federal unemployment.
Yeah.
This is an on-campus job, man.
Right.
She was living the life over the summer.
Oh
But
yeah.
I think that I think that population really came out in a better position when it comes to the wages and rates that they're able to command these days.
Oh yeah.
And it was a push. There was a big push um, to raise minimum wage. And what's interesting to me is the market ended up doing it for us,
Right.
right? The market forced that in the end, and it was due to some oddities in the way that we had that stimulus package built. But ultimately, um, Target said, if I'm going to hire somebody, I can't pay them $10 an hour because nobody will work for me. I have to pay them 13, 14, 15, and 15 is their starting point now.
Right.
And by the time California's minimum wage has caught up to this market, it will be California's been marching towards, I believe, $14 an hour,
Mm.
and their $14 an hour number hits in 2021, and the the market has already said that's too low,
That's right.
and should be paid more.
Well, and people are moving away. I mean,
Yeah.
let's be honest. People are moving to Idaho and to
Yep.
strange places. If you're going to work remotely, especially in white collar jobs, there's a ton of people, and call center jobs, things like that. They're moving away from those city centers because they're hotspots for one. They're on fire for two.
Oh gosh,
Right?
that's not great. No,
No.
but everybody's got their own disasters. I mean, we live in Texas. We've got tornadoes.
That's right. Yeah. So for anyone listening that doesn't know it, Jason and I live about 7 miles from each other, and we meet in the middle and smoke cigars on a regular basis.
It does happen.
We should do
Yeah.
this. We should do that next time we record one of these.
So in the cigar lounge.
Not a
That'd be
bad
great.
idea.
Yeah, I'm for it. I bet
Yeah,
they'd let us do it.
sure they would.
Yeah,
We could make that a regular thing,
we set it up with the mics, with
like
the
a
on the
remote. Yeah,
arms,
like
the
the
whole
ticket.
thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, we could do that. All right, let's
I
make that
think that's a
happen.
good call. All
Okay.
right. So, Jason Roberts, fascinating as always. Thank you for jumping on here with me, and we'll see you soon.
All right. Adios. See ya. Bye bye.
Okay. Don't go anywhere.
Not going.
All right. I'm going to end broadcast.